Hello, everybody, and welcome to our first binational video conference in the midst, or hopefully the latter stages of COVID-19. And we have an excellent panel today where we're so grateful to have the people show up that have. And we'll be looking forward to hearing what they have to say and their insight in recent matters. We'll give it another 20 seconds or so. Our attendee list is growing. We have 45 participants right now, so it's jumping pretty quickly. We'll give the latter people an opportunity to join in and hear the beginning messages. Good. Well, let's get started. Hi, I'm Vern Milo. I'll be your moderator for today. And on behalf of the South Niagara Chambers of Commerce and the Niagara USA Chamber of Commerce, welcome to everybody joining. And we anticipate to be this a very important and informative conversation. And we thank our sponsors, B4 Networks and Growth Associates, for assisting in putting this together. The order of the agenda is going to be to have our representatives, our political representatives, provide an address. 15 minutes that we're providing for the chairwoman of the U.S. County Legislature and for the regional chair of Niagara, Canada. And thereafter, we'll have 10 minutes each for our three mayors. We have the mayor of Niagara Falls, USA, and mayor of Niagara Falls, Canada, and the mayor of Fort Erie, Canada. So, so with that, we could just get started, and we'll begin with Rebecca Wydysh, who's the chairwoman of the county legislature. And Rebecca, I'll leave you the floor.
Thank you so much, Vern. First of all, let me thank, of course, the chambers and everyone who put this call together today. I think if there's one thing we've learned throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, it's just how important collaboration and communication is. It has really been our most useful tool as we work through a situation that certainly none of us have ever seen in our lives, anything like this, much less in our careers and our respective positions. So just thank you so much for being willing to meet and have these discussions because they are so important. As Vern said, I'm Becky Wydysh. I'm chairman of the Niagara County Legislature here in New York, and I'm also a resident of the village of Lewiston. So I can actually see the Lewiston-Queenston Bridge from my front porch, about a 5-minute drive up into the city of Niagara Falls. So I certainly see the impact of the border closings, not just in my daily work, but firsthand in my everyday life as well. I was talking to Mayor Restano of Niagara Falls, New York last night, kind of preparing for this call today, and he made a great comment. He said, Canada is really not like another country to us. We kind of see it as an extension of our own communities. And he's so right. Because we're so close, it's nothing for us to just take a day trip over for shopping or entertainment, just to randomly decide to drive to Niagara-on-the-Lake on a Saturday night to have dinner. And my husband's a member of the Niagara Falls Curling Club, so he's up there every Tuesday. Really, so we are absolutely missing the ability to come over and see our Canadian friends and to visit your businesses, and we look forward to a time that we can do that again safely. And as I was thinking about the call today and kind of what I wanted to talk about, I realized that I don't know much about your situation across the border and what's happening there in Canada. I think as local officials, we've been so focused on what's happening here locally and the struggles that our own residents are having that I don't always read the paper or read articles about Canada because I'm so focused over here on this side. If the bridge opened today, I wouldn't know what I would find open in Canada or if I would need to wear a mask when I got there. All of those important things that people need to understand and know as they're traveling about to be safe. So again, I just think these discussions are going to be so important as we go along to kind of help share that information and educate our residents about what to expect when they can travel again. So I thought that what I would do is just kind of start by giving a quick rundown of how the pandemic began over here and played out over the last several months on our side of the border. Mostly for our Canadian friends who are listening so that they know what we're dealing with here in New York and Niagara County. In January, we saw the first COVID-19 cases being reported in the United States, and President Trump started to work with the CDC, the World Health Organization, and how to handle this across our nation. And by February, certainly more residents had started to take notice and understand just how serious the situation was. Now, the downstate New York City area, of course, was the hardest and fastest hit, which makes sense because there's so many tourists. They're a very densely packed population. So it was understandable that they would have a bigger outbreak faster and sooner. March 1st was the first confirmed case of COVID-19 in New York State, and by March 7th, New York State Governor Andrew Cuomo had declared a state of emergency for the state of New York. And in an effort to minimize the spread of the virus, he began a flurry of executive orders that started closing down schools and recreational activities, implementing strict guidelines of social distancing, all again in an effort to limit that community spread of the virus. His initial goal was to flatten the curve. You might have heard that expression. It's not about completely stopping the virus. We know that that is next to impossible, but really about slowing the rate of transmission over time to avoid overwhelming our healthcare systems that are already taxed. We couldn't have everyone sick at the same time, or our hospitals would quickly be overwhelmed and not have the capacity to hold them all and treat them all. We've seen that in other countries occur. So people were at first encouraged and then ordered to stay at home as much as possible, to maintain a distance of 6 feet of separation, and to wear a face mask when that was not possible. By March 15th, we were seeing the virus spread across the state and closer to our community here in Niagara County. So on the 15th of March, I did declare a state of emergency here in Niagara. And we then had our first positive case reported on the 17th of March. By March 22nd, the governor had implemented what he calls New York on pause. Again, by executive order, what he did was direct all the remaining non-essential businesses that were still open to close. Employees were sent home to work remotely or not at all, and layoffs began far and wide. Only essential businesses remained open at that point. Things like grocery stores, pharmacies, gas stations, and of course they were all subject to very strict guidelines for maintaining a clean and safe work environment and maintaining social distancing. As you know, the US and Canadian border shut down to only essential travel about that time in mid-March, and that has now been extended through June 21st. By April 12th, all of our employees in our businesses that were open were required to wear masks when they were in contact with customers and coworkers. And all individuals over the age of 2 who were able to medically tolerate a face covering have to wear that face mask over their nose and mouth anytime you're out in public, and unable again to maintain that 6 feet of distancing. All drivers and riders using public transportation or for-hire vehicles are required to wear face masks as well. As you can imagine, we've had quite a few difficulties during the phase of shutdown. Businesses were shuttered and owners were trying to figure out how to keep their business from closing permanently without knowing how long this was going to go on or how long they would be closed. What to do with their employees. Many were laid off or simply let go, which you can imagine caused great concern for a lot of our residents. Our unemployment system for the state was terribly overwhelmed. There were delays, people couldn't pay their bills or feed their families. And there's been a great divide between people who completely agree with the safety measures and feel that we should be shut down and taking health first. And then there's those who are adamantly opposed. Elected officials, as you all well know, are kind of in the middle. We're trying to balance the safety and health of our residents while also balancing the drastic effects on our economy. Niagara County and most of our municipalities, like all of you as well, we're trying to maintain vital services with drastically reduced workforces. Most of our offices were closed to the public, so we had to find creative ways to offer our services, either via mail, online, over the phone. We have had significant loss of revenue, as you can imagine, and a lot of difficult decisions are having to be made. I'm told that in New York State, statewide, the loss of revenue from sales tax is close to $700 million just from the months of April and May. So Niagara County, just like counties across the state, are down about 25 to 30% in that revenue each month. and you add in all of the potential and yet unknown cuts from the state aid, and our county, like so many others, is left with a huge void in our budget that we're going to have to account for and figure out. This doesn't end when the health pandemic ends for us. We're all going to be dealing with that situation of rebuilding our economy and trying to get back up and running on a budget that has been depleted. Tourism and cross-border traffic, of course, are some of our biggest revenue generators here in Niagara County. And I know that Mayor Restano is going to talk more specifically about some of the effects on the city of Niagara Falls, where they feel that the hardest. I'll let him get into the numbers and things there for the city. But as far as the border being closed, of course, there's been many specific struggles there as well. Those who are not considered essential for travel struggle with things like maintaining second homes. We have college students who would normally travel across the border to come to places like Niagara University or University of Buffalo, all of our schools. And those students are now worried about traveling across to do their preparation. They have to do things like fingerprinting or schedule preparation. And they're, of course, concerned about doing that because they don't want to be quarantined once they get back to Canada. So we're finding that many students aren't signing up yet for the fall semester, partially because they don't know what's going to be happening here with the schools, but also because they're uncertain about what that border situation will be and how that will affect them if they're trying to come across each day for classes. So I'll give you some statistics on our numbers for our positive cases and death rates and things to kind of put things in perspective. And then we'll talk about the good news of reopening, how that's working here in the county and across the state. And where do we go from here? New York State to date has had over 375,000 positive cases of COVID-19, and that is the highest, of course, of all states in the US. They've also seen 24,133 deaths here in New York State. In Niagara County, we've had, as of yesterday, 1,104 positive cases of COVID-19 with 70 deaths. Some of the good news, though, is that when we first started testing a few months back, and testing was a little bit harder to come by, we were testing mostly individuals who were symptomatic and ill. Our infection rate, or the percentage of positive cases coming back from those tested, was around 20% to start. I think across the state it was about 15%. The good news is the more testing we do, the further we get in the process. After making all of these sacrifices, we are down to about a 2 to 3% infection rate daily, with our average now being down to 6.7% overall. And again, those are dropping across the state. We're seeing numbers in the 2 to 3% infection rate range. Niagara County has been behind the curve of the New York City area this whole time. And we never really saw the drastic spikes and peaks that they saw downstate, which is a good thing. Again, it makes sense to us. We're a more rural community. However, we do have City of Niagara Falls, which has had our highest numbers, of course, as our most densely populated city. And we are very close to the city of Buffalo, which has had very high numbers and high infection rates as well. So we continue to monitor those, but all of our numbers are heading in the right direction. They are on the downward trend, which is good. And we will keep doing what we need to do to make sure that that doesn't start to go up again with a second wave. So how do we handle reopening here in New York? Well, in April, the governor announced a 4-phased approach to reopening industries and businesses in New York. And all of those phases are based on a data-driven regional analysis, and it takes into account 7 metrics that a region must meet to start the reopening process. The 7 metrics include meeting certain numbers and criteria in the areas of decline in hospitalization rates, decline in hospital deaths, new hospitalization rates, hospital bed and ICU bed capacity levels, having enough diagnostic testing capability in your region, and enough contact tracers. And those are the individuals that follow the new positive cases, interview them, and determine who else needs to be notified and tested because they had contact with someone who has the virus. Now, for our local region, Western New York, it includes 5 counties. It's Niagara, Erie, Chautauqua, Cattaraugus, and Allegheny. And Mayor Restano and I are both a part of what they're calling the regional control room for our region. The governor set these regional control rooms up in each region, and our job is to basically monitor those daily numbers. We watch the metrics as we prepare to move through the different phases of reopening. We watch for any red flags that might come up and show that our numbers are climbing back up again, and try to determine why that's happening. We can advocate for businesses and pass along questions and concerns that are coming up. Those can be passed along to the state level for their determination and answers. If all goes well, there's 14-day wait between the phases before you can be considered to move on to the next phase. Now, the 14 days is not a given. That's if your metrics are holding, things are going well, but it certainly is up to the governor to decide when we are ready to move into the next phase of reopening. If you read any of our national news or news coming out of different states, you'll find that other states are opening up much faster. New York State, Governor Cuomo has taken a much more conservative approach, mostly because the state was hit so hard and so fast that we don't want to see that start all over again. So here's how the phases are set up. May 15th, several of the regions entered phase 1, and we followed here in Western New York on May 19th. Phase 1 reopenings include construction, agriculture, forestry, fishing and hunting, retail, that was limited to curbside pickup and drop off, manufacturing and wholesale trade, and takeout and delivery only from restaurants. Now, in each phase, every business who's going to reopen, as well as the businesses who were considered essential and have been working all along, have to follow very strict guidance and directives for maintaining their clean and safe work environments, not only for their employees, but for any clientele that comes into the business. And those guidelines are set by our State Department of Health. On June 2nd, just this past week, a couple days ago, we were able to enter phase 2 in Western New York, which was wonderful. Our businesses were absolutely ready to be in that phase. And phase 2 includes more things like offices, real estate, retail stores if they have a separate entrance. So malls are not yet open, but retail stores with separate entrances can be. Retail, rental, repair and cleaning, vehicle sales, leases and rentals, commercial building management, hair salons and barber shops, although things like nails and spa services are not included yet. And we were just given the green light yesterday to start outdoor restaurant service. Again, there are all very strict guidelines and capacity levels that are in place for these businesses, but it is really good to see some of them up and running and so many of those employees starting to get back to work. Now, phase 3, we have not hit anywhere in the state yet. None of the regions are there. And it will be June 16th before we are able to be considered for that phase here in Western New York region. We don't have a lot of information yet. We're finding as we go through the phases that the governor isn't releasing information on what businesses are included really until just a day or so before. But phase 3, we're told at this point, should include more things and more options for restaurants and food service. Phase 4, the final phase, we would not be eligible until at least June 30th. Again, this is if all goes well and we stick to those 2 weeks between phases. It could be stretched out and longer if our numbers are not holding as we enter more people into the workplace and more people are coming together and potentially spreading the virus again. So June 30th at the earliest is when we would look at phase 4 reopenings, and that should include more things like arts and entertainment, recreation, and education. So still a lot of people staying at home as much as possible, trying to stay safe and healthy. We are only allowed to have non-essential gatherings of 10 or fewer people at this point, and that includes our faith-based community. All of our churches have that limitation. So I know people are eager to get back to summer life. Seen here in Niagara County, most of our festivals, the fair, all of those summer events, concerts, all being canceled because there's just so much uncertainty about when those large groups will be able to come together and if that's going to happen this summer at all. We still have things in question like school for the fall. We know there's no in-person summer school. That can only be done virtually, and there has been no determination yet about how schools will be handled in the fall. So we anxiously await that information. So where are we now? As I said, as we reopen businesses, we're going to have more and more people back in the community going to work. What that means for the Canadian side is a lot of those individuals live in Canada, work in the US. We're going to see many more people going over the bridge and coming into the US as we reopen our businesses. As that border reopens, certainly we don't have any say-so at the county level or even really much at the state level as far as what the president, of course, decides to do with the borders or who will be considered essential and when. But we really need to start advocating. And as we have these discussions and talk more and more about those difficulties for people coming across, we can certainly help on our end by advocating to the governor's office, who can pass that information along to the federal level. We certainly need to help educate our residents. As I said, they need to know when they come across, when we go over to your side, what do you need to know? What will be open? How is it running? What are those guidelines that we need to follow that might be different from one side to the other? If the border opening is extended past June 21st, we would certainly need to advocate for more essential determinations, in my opinion. There are more people that need to get across to maintain properties, continue their education, all of those things that they're doing. We would certainly have to be a loud voice for our communities that are affected so greatly by this close border crossing. And then, of course, we need to talk about how we're going to help each other rebuild our economies and keep our residents safe and healthy at the same time. We rely on each other so much for those cross-border travel and sharing the customers and the residents in our restaurants and in our stores. So really working together on how we can make that happen and build from here. So again, I just want to thank everyone who's taking part today. I think this is wonderful, and we need to have future discussions as we move along and see how things progress. I'm hoping that at the very least, by the end of the call, we're able to share contact information like emails so we can be in touch. I know that our chamber, Corey, thank you, you're on the call, has been wonderful about sharing information with our businesses and connecting us in this way. So thank you all again. I look forward to future discussion and hearing some of your thoughts and concerns as this call goes on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Wydysh. That's wonderful, very informative, and certainly to reciprocate, there are a lot of things that we don't know in Canada about what's happening, 1 kilometer away. So thank you. One thing I did forget to mention initially is that, we have 92 participants right now, and please submit your questions. The chat icon will not be functional for those that are attendees, but the Q&A is functional. So right in the middle at the bottom of your screen, you should have a Q&A logo. Please submit your questions, and we'll gather them and talk about them at the end. Next, we'd love to hear from our regional chair of Niagara, Canada, Jim Bradley. So Jim, I'll pass the floor on to you. Thank you.
Good. Happy to be with you today. First of all, I want to say that much of the information that Rebecca has provided is information that you could almost say is a ditto on this side in terms of the closings that have taken place, the action that's taken place by the federal, the provincial government, and the local government. So we're in many of the same circumstances here that you are in the USA. We recognize, and it goes almost without saying, how important it is for the relationship between those in Western New York and Southern Ontario, based in Niagara, our part of Southern Ontario, but beyond our borders as well, and how difficult it is to have the border closed. Nevertheless, because of the circumstances we've confronted, we in Niagara, and this has been reflected from what the province has dictated, what the federal government has dictated, have been very cautious in terms of any reopening of the border. In fact, our municipalities locally have urged the federal government not to move quickly and to move only based on the influence that would have, the impact that would have on the health of the people residing in Niagara. And I'm sure that that's a primary concern of people on the American side as well. I will recall, and this is a bit of a relationship I think that's important to remember, and that is we had some challenges that took place after the attacks on New York and Washington, the 9/11 attacks, and the border began to tighten in those circumstances. I had the job of Minister of Tourism and Recreation in Ontario, the Minister of Transportation, Minister of Community Safety, a variety of ministries. And I know I went to Washington on that occasion to try to thin the border rather than thicken the border, which we have at the present time, because we wanted, in normal circumstances, when we get past this, the border to move as expeditiously as possible, people moving back and forth, both in terms of goods and in terms of tourism, individuals crossing the border. And as has been noted by Rebecca, there are a number of people who work on either side of the border, residents of the United States who may work in Canada, and those in Canada who may work in the United States. That's not unique to Niagara, but it is extremely important here. And unfortunately, it's one way when we go across the border of transmitting the COVID-19 disease, which has had the major impact on us. But I recall the great work. I want to point this out because I think it's exceedingly important to know that the people along the borders had a commonality of interest. And back when we were trying to thin the border rather than thicken the border to make it more expeditious to cross, we had great cooperation. What we found in the United States was the further people were from the border, the less they understood the impact and the importance of the free flow of people and goods and services across the border. Similarly, in Canada, if you were well away from the border, you would not recognize that. So the coalition, informal coalition that was formed here in Niagara and in other border areas, but I'll zero in on Niagara, was exceedingly important in getting changes made. For instance, people being able to cross the border with what we called a secure license, a more secure driver's license. And similarly, in New York, there was a move in that direction. And we made the case, I think, with locally elected representatives, but the chambers of commerce and business community made the case for that free flow. And our two border mayors who are with us today, Jim Diodati and Wayne Redekop, would remember those days and how important it was to have that relationship and to have that coalition taking place. Now, in terms of where we are, because we're talking about COVID-19, where we are at the present time is that we in Niagara, the regional municipality of Niagara, have at the present time 707 cases. We've experienced 60 deaths. Most of those have been in long-term care homes, as they've been almost around the world. And we have 562 resolved cases. We've been taking 45 days to double. So we've been very pleased. In fact, in a few of our days recently, we've had no new cases, except we've had a spike now because, as you would be aware, we have an agricultural component to the Niagara region. And so we have foreign workers who come in here, temporary foreign workers. And we've had an outbreak at a couple of farms, but it has been relatively controlled. So we're pleased with the progress we've made. Our medical officer of health and others have cautioned that we should proceed with caution in terms of opening things up. The business community on both sides of the border, people who rely on employment, are eager to see the economy reopening. And as the border mayors will tell you again, one of the things we will face is not only people coming across the border, but coming from the Greater Toronto area where the COVID-19 affliction is much more pronounced than it is here, and trying to not encourage people to come to Niagara at the present time. And that's hard for us because your border mayors and those of us at the region have over the years eagerly asked people to come to visit the Niagara region and to make purchases and to enjoy what we have to offer. So that's been a significant change. But I want to emphasize that our municipalities, we have 12 area municipalities, that is local municipalities within the regional municipality of Niagara, and they are unanimous in wanting to proceed with great caution, or as we say, an abundance of caution in terms of reopening. But when we do reopen, we'll have to do so in a rather innovative way, and I don't want to steal Jim Diodati's suggestions here, because he has some good ones on some innovative ways when we get to reopening the border as to how we can do it. I want to say that we declared an emergency in the province on April 3rd of 2020. There were a lot of provisions in there that affect us, and I think Rebecca made a good point when she said, you know, when the border reopens, we should have information available for those crossing the border as to what the rules are going to be on one side or the other, because they're not going to be the same. Many of them will be coincidental, but some of them are not going to be the same. So it's going to be essential for us on both sides of the border to provide that information to our citizens who are going to be crossing that border, to know what the rules and regulations might be. And that's very challenging at all times because, well, we who are elected representatives and representatives of chambers of commerce and so on tend to have that information. Others may not. So I won't necessarily go through too much of what we have done, other than to say we have the state of emergency still in effect in the province of Ontario. We in Niagara have declared a state of emergency, as our 12 municipalities, along with the regional municipality, we have declared a state of emergency, which gives us a few additional powers, not many. Most of those powers come at the federal and provincial level with a state of emergency. But most of our businesses have been closed down. They're beginning to open to a certain extent now. Now, if you have a storefront business, you are allowed to operate that, not into malls and things of that nature. Been cautious on parks and the Niagara River, which divides us, has people who come to this area, not necessarily from the US now, but from other areas. And people like Wayne and Jim have had to cope with people coming down from the Greater Toronto area, which is a huge population, and they have certain expectations, and so there's certain challenges there. I've been asked to, although this is, I think, probably knowledge to most here, but I've been asked today to share with you the statistics regarding. That's always don't glaze over as I do it with your eyes, but statistics I've been asked by this panel to share. Niagara exports $4.5 billion, that's it with a B, goods to the U.S. We import $1.3 billion in goods from the U.S. There are 566 Niagara companies exporting to the U.S. 1,406 Niagara companies import from the U.S. The top exports to the U.S. by value include machinery, plastics, iron and steel, electrical, electronic equipment, wood products, and agricultural products. Top imports by value from the U.S. include machinery, chemicals, plastics, iron, steel, boats, vessels, and electronic equipment. Anyway, I don't want to get into great detail on that, but here's I was asked, as I say, to provide some of this information. The U.S. imports $47.5 billion in goods through our Niagara borders alone, and Canada $46.4 billion through those same borders, relatively the same. All these figures are 2019. Canada is currently the second largest goods trading partner with $834.2 billion Canadian in two-way trade during 2018. So all these statistics, and I think they're important that we know, are huge statistics. They really point out, if I were to list them, continue to list them, which I won't, at the risk of, I know some of you are nodding in agreement, others may be nodding off as I read the statistics, but I think they're important to know, and you've asked me to do so, that this is a huge border area for both people and goods passing, and we always have to emphasize that to our national and provincial governments. We're largely at the mercy of, and that's, I'm not using that negatively, but we're largely at the mercy of our provincial government in terms of rules and regulations in terms of reopening. Our provincial government has urged, as have pretty well all provincial governments, have urged the federal government not to reopen the border quickly. And the federal government has responded to that. There have been some good talks between Canada and the United States about when to reopen the border, but more particularly how to open the border. What changes will we see? We keep hearing the terminology, the new normal. And that is going to be something that forward-thinking people are going to have to look at to see how it's changing. Look how we're meeting now. Often we've gathered together in a a location in the U.S. or Canada. As individuals, we shake hands, we interact with one another. Here we are today on Zoom, and that's a big difference. But much of our business is being done that way now. So I can say that we will be welcoming Americans back to Canada, to Ontario, to the Niagara region, when it is safe to do so. We will want to coordinate as much as possible what the rules and regulations will be, but they will again be dictated by national and provincial governments. But as close as possible, where it makes sense, it would be nice to have rules which are similar. I noticed in the Cross-Border Innovation Prosperity Initiative, the letter sent to Senator Gillibrand of New York had some rather good recommendations, I thought. The one thing I noticed, first thing I mentioned was the rather than one size fits all approach, the US and Canada should consider a cross-border regional approach to reopening the border. I think that makes sense, although there are certain rules that are going to be right across the country in terms of border crossing. There are going to be some specifics. We want them to look at that. We want to utilize the Regulatory Cooperation Council, so we don't get into unnecessary regulations, but we still have to have them. We have to have, there are differences related to medical supply and other critical industries, and we certainly want to see that flow of goods going across the border. We're going to be confronted both, and you're seeing it now. The demand will be there for buy Canadian and buy American. One of the things I think we in the border areas particularly can urge our national government is to exempt Canada from buy American, exempt Americans from buy Canadian provisions, because the demand will be great on that. You've already heard it on both sides of the border, particularly when it's been hard to get medical supplies, for instance. There are a lot of people saying, well, we should just look after ourselves. I think it's important we keep that free flow of medical supplies across there. And there's going to be stimulus funding, obviously, in both the U.S. and Canada. We have said it's important for the U.S. MCA, the new trade agreement, to be enforced by July 1. The U.S. and Canada should invest in border technology to ensure the border crossers are healthy and promote economic recovery. Once again, before those innovations are going to be necessary. And we hope it doesn't slow down the border, but again, any errors will be under the auspices of an abundance of caution, but there may be new technologies. Certainly, we want to encourage more people to get the Nexus Pass. For those of us who are sports fans, and a lot of us are, I've been a Buffalo Sabres season's ticket holder since 1970. I was 5 years old at the time in 1970, and Buffalo Bills and Buffalo Bisons and your college and university sports and entertainment. Back and forth we have that flow. So we've taken advantage of that. We want to see that return. But again, when we come back, we will want to, when everything's fine again, to enhance the Nexus Pass. Now, for those of us who have it, there may be a bit of a negative because we have a privilege now when we have a Nexus Pass, but there'll be more lanes. And again, I think it's just important to move them. I know when I've come back over the border, in normal times, when the border bridges are backed up, I phone my federal member of parliament and complain that the border there are only so many booths open at the border. So that's going to be important. The Buffalo and Erie Bridge Authority, Peace Bridge Authority, and Niagara Bridge Authority certainly are going to need federal and provincial financial assistance to assist them. So there are a lot of things that we can do in that regard. I don't want to go on at great length. I do have a list of things that, again, we've done in Ontario, but I really think that our two border mayors, Wayne Reddekopp in Fort Erie, right across from Buffalo, and Jim Diodati in Niagara Falls, right across from the communities there, Niagara Falls, Lewiston, Youngstown, and so on. I think they really see the impact on their businesses. They really see the dangers of opening early, and when we do open, I think they'll be looking for some innovative changes as well. So I want to thank you very much for this particular forum. Again, I commend chambers of commerce on both sides, as I mentioned earlier on. Back when we had challenges before, we were able to resolve some of the problems at the instigation of our chambers of commerce. And perhaps when this is all over, we can go back to some more formal meetings that can take place between elected representatives and others dealing with matters that confront us at the border. So thank you all very much. I appreciate the opportunity to participate, and I look forward to others, and particularly my two mayors from Niagara. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Bradley. That's wonderful. We'll pass it on to the Mayor of the City of Niagara Falls, USA, Robert Restano. Mayor Restano.
Morning. Thank you very much again for this opportunity to speak with you and to meet with the other elected representatives in the region. I will say this to you. I've been in this position for 5 months, and it has been some of the most challenging 5 months I've ever had in my business career. Obviously, to state those things that others, that both chairs have indicated, certainly here in the city of Niagara Falls, the inability to have cross-border traffic has profoundly affected and impacted the city's finances. Some of the information through the first quarter suggests that the cross-border traffic was reduced by 2/3 in both directions. So we find that this isn't just a circumstance of all of the other business industry reopening and all of those things that we need to have happen, but this is really about two communities, the communities in Niagara County, Western New York, as well as the communities in Southern Ontario that have always enjoyed, as Chair Wydysh indicated, have always enjoyed essentially an easy flow of not only traffic, but also of commerce between the residents. And so that has had a significant and profound impact on the city of Niagara Falls, New York. I have had the pleasure of already having a couple of conversations with Mayor Diodati. His experience relative to this region and the impacts that this is having have been very helpful to me as we start to chart a course moving ahead with what will eventually be a reopening here. I think all of us on this call recognize that while it would be wonderful to anticipate by the close of this tourist season, we will have climbed back up to where we were at the close of the 2019 season, but I believe that we're all realists and recognize that that would be dreaming. In the end, I think, as Chair Bradley indicated, we are going to have to be innovative. We are going to have to recognize that there are going to be some new ways, not only to get through the balance of this particular season and moving forward, but also how do we address what, as Chair Bradley indicated, what will be the new normal. There will be things that folks will be able to readily adapt to. And we as public officials in these communities are also going to be faced with those who are going to grumble about some of the things that are going to become part of their new experience in traveling back and forth, as well as experiencing the things that they enjoy on both sides of the border, because even within industries, within businesses, there will be particular requirements. So I can say, and I really won't, some of it's a function of just, as I say, being new to this particular position and having a lot of this happen. I will simply say that I am excited at the idea that the economy is going to reopen again. I think that you can hear from what Chair Wydysh indicated. This is going to be, at least in the New York State side, this will be something that's dictated and walked out principally by the governor's office. The other thing that I will say is that I'm hoping that there will be some coordination between the state and federal government. There are times during this pandemic when they have preached out of the same book and then there are times when they haven't. That kind of conflict is going to make it somewhat difficult for those along the border to be able to walk out the requirements. I suspect that once the two federal governments sort out how this border opening occurs, I would suspect that there will be additional requirements perhaps imposed by our state government that I'm also going to have to factor into the mix. So I know that this is a story that's yet untold and that we have some things we have to do to get there, but I am certainly looking forward to the opportunity to collaborate with both Mayor Diodati and Mayor Redcup to make sure that when the border is opened, we can get back to that free travel that all of us have enjoyed. And the remarkable thing is we've taken for granted for so very, very, very long, and that this particular pandemic has brought front and center to suggest to us just how important it is to our region, to individuals. As Chair Wydysh indicated, people have personal interests, whether it's family and friends or property on both sides of the border. So I am excited at the opportunity to collaborate on those ideas. And I, again, thank you for the opportunity to engage in this conversation this morning.
Thank you, Mayor Restano. That's wonderful. We'll now hear from Jim Diodati, Mayor of Niagara Falls, Canada. Mayor Diodati.
Thanks very much, Vern. And I appreciate being on the call. And I know it's primarily business related. I've noticed all the questions that have come in on our Q&A have all been about reunification of families and loved ones. So I do want to touch on it, even though it's not a municipal issue and it's not something that we're involved in. But I totally understand, having been born and raised, grown up in the border, and I know Mayor Redcup can relate as Mayor Restano, that it's, for us, I know in Niagara Falls, it's one city divided by a river. So we don't see, I mean, growing up, you know, I've got my aunts and uncles in Depew and Poughkeepsie and Seattle and all across the U.S. A lot of my family's all over, and it's very difficult not being able to see them. But I will say this too, I don't even see my parents right now who live here in Niagara Falls, Canada. I've seen them in the driveway, but that's it. There's no hugging, there's no going in each other's houses. We've been taking this serious because, you know, as they say, if you treat it casually, you become a casualty. And we don't want that kind of thing to happen. And I think we've been very successful at, as you say, flattening the curve, or as we like to say here, crushing the curve. So we decided we didn't want to be gentle with that curve. We didn't want to feather the edges or massage it. We wanted to crush it. So we've had a very effective campaign over here. And as a result, Niagara's had a very low rate. And we're looking at a number of approaches here in Canada for opening up, including a regional approach. We'll see what happens, but we're expecting announcements anytime from our premier about phase 2 opening, which will allow restaurants, patios, attractions. We're ready. We're at that point now. It's been a few months, and now we need to look at the back side of this. Yes, the front side is COVID, and between now and a vaccine, what are we going to do? We can't just sit in our basements rationing powdered milk. We need to do something. We need to get out, and we've done a terrific job of keeping the numbers low. And if we haven't learned in 3 months how to follow protocol, we're never going to learn. So you keep your distance, you wash and sanitize. And I think those are good habits going forward anyway, especially during traditional flu season. And I'm happy to say that our numbers are below what the traditional numbers would have been for flu deaths. And I'm glad that we've been able to contain that. So now we've got to look at other things. So a lot of places haven't been cutting grass. So we've got another issue. We've got ticks, which lead to Lyme disease. You know, we've got more deaths by suicide. We've got family violence. We've got other things on the back end. We've got bankruptcies. We've got people not able to make mortgage payments. We've got a lot of stress coming in other ways, too much cortisol being released right now. So we need to look at that aspect of the recovery with a full focus on the finish line. So I think we're definitely on our way there. I see Universal Studios opened up in Florida. Las Vegas has opened up now. Disney's opening up in a few weeks, and we're going to be opening up. And I think too, I hope that the powers that be, and I'd be happy to advocate for anybody that's got family on both sides of the border, you know, like we do, that there's got to be a way. I mean, if we've got so many, and I know our Chair Bradley made reference to the innovative approaches that we have. Of course, infrared temperature checks. That's the first line of defense. Actually, before that, if you're sick, stay home. That's my first approach. If I'm sick, I'm not visiting family or friends. That should be all of our approaches. And if they're sick, I don't want them visiting me either. I want to see you, but not till you're better. And don't take this personal to my brother. When you visit, I'm going to check your temperature at the door. I love you, but I'm checking your temperature at the door for both of our sakes. And then the next thing is, you know, I've got sanitizer at my doors. Like, here, sanitize, go wash your hands. Before we go to the next step, let's just do this. Let's just do it. Learn some good protocol. And I can tell you, having gone through cancer, I've been just over a year and a few months of being cancer-free. I lived a good period of my time that I had to avoid any kind of germ whatsoever. And I know what it's like. And you know, being in politics, you know, you don't put your hands anywhere near your face. That's why in the beginning, healthcare and public health experts were telling you not to wear masks. It's not that they were saying don't wear masks. They knew that people keep adjusting them. And that's how you get sick. You can have germs on your hands and be fine. It's once they enter your body through your eyes, your nose, your mouth, that's when you're in trouble. So people that keep adjusting their adjustable masks and the nose area, they're just absolutely making things worse. So now we're saying face coverings, you know, the kind that you adjust over your ears. And that's kind of more of the approach that they've now taken, and they've done a pivot and they've said, yes, masks are a good idea. So what are they doing in Vegas? What are they doing in Orlando and Kissimmee? Well, they're taking a proactive approach, putting demarcations on the ground. And so we're about to launch here in Niagara Falls. It's called safetoplay.ca and safetostay.ca. And our provincial tourism minister said we're the first tourism destination in the province to have a full recovery plan and marketing plan in place, ready to go. We've had it ready to go for several weeks, where we use some innovative technology, some that have been actually developed right here in Niagara. And as Chair Bradley mentioned, you know, we've got a lot of agriculture here still. So we've got a lot of innovations there, including a way that they sanitize the produce with a combination of vaporizing hydrogen peroxide and UV lights, where they can virtually kill all germs. Really neat process. And I can tell you, there's some of our operators that have already purchased these units. All the hospitals have purchased them. You can fully sanitize anything, masks, fruit, vegetables, helmets, golf clubs, and you can quickly put them through this process. So we're looking to have a fully interactive, protocol-based, research-supported way of opening. So it'll start with checking your temperature, demarcations on the ground to keep everybody 6 feet apart, 2 meters if you're speaking Canadian, to make sure that we've got sanitizers, antimicrobial sprays on everything. And some of these sprays that have been developed can last up to a year indoors. We're going to have touchless everything, touchless sinks, touchless hand sanitizer dispensers, touchless door opening, everything tap. They've raised tap now to be more than the $100, so you don't have to actually punch in the buttons necessarily. You know, the list goes on and on. Masks, face coverings available, mandatory in a lot of places. Of course, we have to cut back on our numbers. And who better to manage big crowds than tourist attractions, who normally put millions of people through their doors every day. So how are we going to be impacted, Niagara Falls? Niagara Falls is the #1 leisure destination in all of Canada. We have 14 million people here every year. Typically, 25% of them are American. So is that going to impact us? Yes. There'll be a lot more staycations on both sides of the border. The good news is, because of low oil prices and cheap gas, the rubber tire market should be thriving, and there'll be a lot more people, I believe, that'll be anxious to visit, even if they can't cross the border quite yet. Today in the Globe and Mail, there's a good article just a few pages in on the concept that the border, we need to start having the discussion around opening the border, how we're going to do it. You can't just say it's not going to open. You know, right now, I know everybody's trying to deal with our challenges on both sides, but we need to plan for opening. You can't wait until the time and then plan. You have to have everything in place for when we do. And the technology already exists. And I'm proud to say that there's a lot of testing processes being done all over, including here in Niagara. We've got a biotech company right now that sends out 100,000 COVID-19 testing kits every day. They ship them out to the US, Europe, Australia, and there's a lot of new kits that give you almost instantaneous results. So we need to continue. There's Plato had a quote a long time ago that said, necessity is the mother of invention. And I believe because resilience is built into our DNA, we're going to survive because we have to. I mean, after 9/11, people said, oh, we're doomed. That's it. We're finished. The border's closed. We'll never recover. Only less than 5% of Americans even have passports. And today, more than 50% of Americans have passports because we did a pivot. We adopted, and that's the nature of what we do. There was H1N1, mad cow, SARS, currency fluctuations, crazy weather. We've had everything but the locust. And we seem to always bounce back, and we will bounce back. But between now and bounce back, the reason we need to get things going is because there's a lot of businesses just barely hanging on. And anyone who's been self-employed, I've been self-employed for more than 25 years in a number of businesses, I can tell you during the best of times, it's hard to run a business and be successful. Can you imagine during these times? And my heart goes out to Mayor Restano. My God, talk about baptism by fire. I mean, after this, you'll be battle ready for anything that comes your way. And we have shared objectives and shared challenges. And we both understand clearly that what happens on one side of the border affects the other side. We're interrelated. That's the way it is. And that's the way it's always going to be. As a matter of fact, when I travel in the US, I laugh because oftentimes people will say, well, how could you be the mayor of Niagara Falls? Aren't you Canadian? And I said, yes, I'm the mayor of Niagara Falls, Canada. And most people have no idea there are two Niagara Falls. And I'm okay with that because they just understand it's Niagara Falls, right? And it's one of the great brands of the world. You know, I often call it the Coca-Cola of municipalities because you can't go anywhere in the world where they don't know Niagara Falls. They might not know a lot of places. Well, of course, I know they know Fort Erie too. There's clearly that's right up there. I would call that Pepsi, and we're Coke. So hopefully, Mayor Redekop's okay with that. But regardless, what's happening here is important. We have to get the economy up and running. In Niagara, 40,000 jobs are dependent on tourism. And that's not Niagara Falls, that's spread out throughout the region. When you look at just our casinos, 4,500 good jobs, every one of them laid off. 98% of our tourist industry is laid off. So it's been beyond decimating. We've had a lot of challenges, nothing like this, but we will bounce back. Before this happened, the economy was doing terrific. Already many of the stocks are bouncing back. People realize this is not because of the economy, it's because of an external force to the economy. And a lot of people are anxious to get going. Unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of collateral damage. There's going to be a lot of suffering in the meantime. We got to go through the ugly stuff to get to the good stuff. But focus on the good stuff because we will prevail. None of us panicked. We knew this was the time for planning. And that's exactly what we did. A proactive approach on how we're going to move forward. Our 4 border crossings here in Niagara represent around 10 million cars, around 2 million trucks, and it's going to continue, and we're going to open up, and we're going to be successful. And the goal now is if we can get things up and running by July 1st, 4th weekend, we can capture hopefully 60% of what we lost. And I don't need to tell you those 100 days of summer, and that's generally between the July 1st, 4th weekend and Labor Day. That's really, really crucial for our survival. That's like squirrels collecting their nuts in the summer for the wintertime. We need that to survive through the wintertime. So let's reunite our families that are divided by the border. Let's come up with ways to get people back together. Let's focus on how we're going to open up our businesses and our patios and how we're going to open up the border. Let's not let fear guide our decisions. Let's understand that none of us get out of life alive. We can't focus on fear. We have to be well aware of it, take all the precautions necessarily, take the dimmer approach, not the light switch approach, but with our eyes firmly focused on opening and getting families back together, because that's where we need to be, back together, because we need to have more serotonin, less cortisol in our bodies. And I cannot wait to get across that border and give Robert a big Canadian hug when the time is right. Of course, I'll check his temperature first, and I'll have plastic on, but I'm going to hug him. So thanks very much, Vern.
Thank you, Mayor Diodati. I'm sure Mayor Restano has some comments on the newly acclaimed mayor of Niagara Falls, USA, Jim Diodati, but we'll see what happens. We certainly want to address the issue in our Q&A regarding the family destitution, as you brought up, Mayor Diodati, because it has been very prevalent in the 26 questions we've had. Our last but certainly not least, we'll want to hear from Mayor of Fort Erie, Mayor Wayne Redekop. So Mayor Redekop, I'll hand the floor over to you.
So after listening to my four colleagues and having heard everything that they've said, there's not really much left to say. And I know this was intentional. But then I began to analyze why I would be last. And I realized that I am the mature, calm, cautious parent to Mayor Jim Diodati's exuberant, effervescent, spontaneous teenager. And so I'm the counterbalance. No, I share the sense of optimism. And let me say that I was the mayor of Fort Erie in 2001. And I've been the mayor on the only two occasions when the Peace Bridge has been closed to traffic. One was a large major snowstorm, one was 9/11. And I've been through the border wars in terms of all of the efforts to try to reopen and facilitate the movement of people and goods across the border from 2001 right through until my term ended in 2006. And then I've been involved again. So it's very important, and I think that the comment was made by perhaps Chair Bradley about the lack of understanding of the dynamic of the border. The further you get away from this border, the more difficult it is for people to understand the significance of it and how closely linked the people are on either side of the border. And I believe that, as in the past, it will be people, whether as individuals or as business people or as members of organizations, who will actually move the reopening of the border in a logical fashion. One will accommodate the needs of people and the needs of business as we try to deal with this probably most challenging of times. In terms of the local impacts, I think Mayor Diodati may have touched upon it, but all of the businesses that are associated with any of the movement of people into Niagara have been impacted. So if you're somebody that provides service to a cottage owner, if you're somebody that provides meals or accommodations, you've been affected. Retail has been decimated here, particularly in the parts of Fort Erie, such as Ridgeway and Crystal Beach, that really have a large influx of American seasonal residents. And that's been terribly difficult. Most of our summer events have been canceled. And that means that all of the organizations, all of the businesses that could have capitalized on that particularly busy period of time and revenue opportunity for them, they're going to be losing that. And it doesn't matter how much we try to recapture that. It isn't going to happen this year. It may not happen next year. We're in this for the long haul. And so that's the challenge that we're faced with. The prime consideration when we talk about the border really has to be health and safety. And on the one hand, we're all familiar with how cautious the health authorities are. They're extremely cautious. They're not paid, like lawyers, they're not paid to be adventuresome. They're paid to be conservative and cautious. And so we're going to have to take that into account as we try to reopen the border. And when I think about how the border is going to be reopened, I do agree that it will be with some caution. I do agree that there are various levels and degrees of who should be crossing that border. Right now, it's essential travel. So in terms of businesses, I understand that personal traffic is down about 95% to 97% across the Niagara borders. I understand that the commercial traffic is down 20 to 25%. We're all affected, I'm sure, by businesses and exporters and importers that are reliant upon that border and the ability to move across the border. So any technology that will facilitate that is good because it's what we rely upon. It's our lifeblood here in Niagara on either side of that border. In terms of the family, the friends, the neighbors, yes, that's very important for us to be able to reunite families. And as Mayor Diodati has said, that's the primary source of the questions that we're being asked about today. Yesterday on Twitter, the provincial government, which has now moved to a new form of releasing its laws and orders and regulations, announced that short-term rentals, cottage rentals are now going to be open in Ontario. And so we're waiting for the regulations to find out what that actually means. We haven't received them yet and don't know when we will get them, but that means that people within Ontario can go to their cottages. That's not a problem if you're going from Kingston to Niagara or Niagara to Muskoka or any of the other places in Ontario where there hasn't been quite the hotspot that we've got in the GTA and Hamilton. But what's going to happen is in Niagara, we will have a lot of people, and same with Muskoka and Haliburton, we'll have a lot of people from the GTA and Hamilton coming into Niagara. And hopefully, we will be able to impress upon them the message, which is, if you're coming here, follow the health guidelines. Don't go out if you're not feeling well. Maintain physical distance if you do go out. Keep washing your hands. Make sure that things are sanitized. Try not to jeopardize the health and safety of those around you. I can't imagine that opening the border here, once New York State has reached a situation where they've got their COVID-19 in hand, I can't imagine that it could be worse than all of the people who are going to be coming in here from the GTA. It won't be. But there are obviously rules that apply to an international border that don't apply within a province or a state. So I think we're going to have to look at, in terms of the border, probably regional openings. And I'm not thinking of regional part of Ontario, part of Quebec. I'm thinking in terms of regional, maybe Manitoba and British Columbia and Alberta, maybe they open, or maybe not Alberta. Maybe Ontario doesn't open until later. Maybe Quebec doesn't open until later, depending on what the health circumstances are, because that will have to be the guiding criteria. And in the meantime, when we look going forward, I agree with all of you who have suggested that we will need to rely upon the technology that we have and the technology that can be invented. Mayor Diodati is way ahead of the curve in terms of contemplating what things are going to be necessary in order to accommodate crowds. We have some businesses in Fort Erie as well that are looking at that, and they've been designing as well mechanisms where they can ensure that people that come to their tourist attraction will be safe, because they can't afford not to have people coming and not be safe. And despite the fact that we've got businesses that want to open, and we have leaders that want the economy to be open, this will all be guided by people. They will decide themselves whether they feel safe, whether they think that they can go forward. And for all the occasions where we see exceptions to prudent and responsible conduct, the vast majority of people are careful, they're prudent, they're sensible. And that's what we have to rely upon, and that's what we have to speak to. So we have to make sure that we get the messaging out that will speak to them. In the old days, there used to be a Niagara River Mayors Coalition. I think at one point, Mayor Diodati, you came in near the tail end of it. I think that needs to be reinstituted, because there are some opportunities for the leaders along the border to discuss matters relative to tourism, trade, transportation, and people issues. So that's something that I would think we should try to get back on the rails. I really look forward to the opportunity to meet all of you again personally, because this is starting to wear. And I guess my final thoughts are, and I'm echoing comments made by Dr. Anthony Fauci maybe a month and a half ago when he was asked a question about ordering people to do certain things. We live in democracies. We live in great democracies. And those democracies rely upon the sensibility of people who live in our countries. And so human nature is what we have to work with. We can't order people to do things. That isn't as effective as persuading them to do things and providing them with the information so that they can make the right decisions. And that may sound overly optimistic, but I think in these times, we all know that no matter how dark the skies are right now, the sun will appear once those clouds pass. And I have no doubt that it may take a bit longer for us to get back to a normal. The new normal is change. There's constant change. We've all adapted to change over the course of our lifetimes and over the course of the times that we've been in office. Some of us have had to adapt more quickly than others, but that's the constant. So I think that we will be able to manage this. I think that we will be able to accommodate the needs of our residents and our businesses, and we will be able to do that all in a safe and a prudent fashion. And I'm heartened to know that there are such good political leaders on both sides of the border who can work with business and can work with people to ensure that we do get that border opened, and we do make sure that our economies and our people thrive.
Thank you, Mayor Redekop. That's great. And now I know why you were the last one to speak. That was wonderful. Thank you. The questions, wanting to get into them right now. As mentioned, they're predominantly issues of family hardship and hardship that's occurring. I don't think anybody can really dispute how great of a job our public health institutions have done in really handling this whole COVID issue. It's been amazing. Chairwoman Wydysh, Wydysh started off with talking about all the sequences of events that have taken place chronologically. That's happened in every government institution, it seems, and everybody's done an admirable job. So it's really phenomenal. Nonetheless, there was no room or wiggle room to deal with true hardship cases. Be it an ailing mother in Buffalo and the family in Fort Erie and on and on and on. We've seen a number of those come through here. And I know this isn't our jurisdiction specifically, but does anybody have anything to add that can we set up some kind of an ombudsman or anything as an exceptions method, or is there no room for that, or what are potential solutions other than wait? And everybody seems to think the end of June could be there. But as mentioned, that's cautioned based on what happens with our cases and how we go from there. So would anybody like to comment on what's been a very prevalent concern?
Vern, I will say one thing. I noticed Ron Riennis put up CICnews.com posting. I can't access it from the way I'm set up right now, but I'm guessing that might possibly address some of the questions there.
Good.
It's a federal issue. It's not municipal. So
Yeah.
all we can do is lobby. But I'm going to tell you, I feel for the people when your family, and I know a lot of people, I'm friends of mine who live in Niagara Falls, Canada, who are nurses at Niagara Falls Memorial in Niagara Falls, New York. And I can't imagine them getting stopped and separated and not being able to see their families. That it would be terrible. So I think some of the answers may be there, and we could certainly lobby, but I like the idea of some ombudsman or representative or somebody or a coalition that lobbies for these people, because living on the border, if we don't lobby for it, nobody will. And I'd say there's probably more people in that situation along the border than anywhere else, just because that's the way it is. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there.
Great, thank you. Hey, any other comments on that issue?
Vern, I know that I've had an opportunity to speak with Congressman Higgins' office as well as with Senator Schumer's office about this very topic. And as Mayor Diodati said, it really centered around the hospital, and some of the folks who I know have that particular issue, as well as the chair said, Chair Wydysh, about those who have properties. So I know that there is some conversations that are currently going on in committee. I don't know that anything has yet come to pass, but certainly if there is a point person who can focus on that among the many other things that we have to make sure we get try to get right, that would be a great suggestion.
Great, thank you. The other thing that's come up of late is discussion of whether we should be having a broad brush federal ruling on what opens, or a provincial, or perhaps even a regional, just because even on a provincial or a state level, we see pockets where it isn't an issue. Statistically, it's not an issue. Of course, we can't isolate those pockets from a transportation standpoint, so that brings up other issues, and so forth. The example right now is they're talking about releasing the West Coast of BC and Washington State earlier than we see elsewhere, just because of the prevalence of COVID and so on and so forth. Does anybody have comment as to whether they are happy with the present jurisdiction as far as releases, or whether there should be wiggle room in terms of consideration of changes in that area? Maybe that's a contentious question, but I'll throw it out there.
So my thoughts on this are basically that this is federal government jurisdiction, and we're faced with the same challenge here. I think in Ottawa, there's a lack of full appreciation of the significance of the border and how the border works. There's no doubt that we have MPs that represent ridings along the border. They're not always in government, and even if they are in government, they may not be the loudest voices in government. So that border mayors do have, and chairs of counties and regions along the border do have a role to play in trying to educate and inform the policymakers what's happening here, and perhaps providing some solutions as to how the border could be better managed. We did this before. We used to go to Ottawa, we used to go to Washington and speak to decision makers, elected officials, their staffs as well. So I think we need to bear that in mind, that we can't simply rely upon the federal governments to do what is going to accommodate our needs. I think we need to be speaking up for ourselves.
Great. Any other comments in that regard? Chair Bradley?
Yes, if I may, the provincial government in Ontario has been trying to deal with the openings on a regional basis. To this point in time, the province has decided, although these things change almost daily because circumstances change, the province has been reluctant to have regional openings. And their thinking has been that when you open a region, the people will come from a closed region to the open region and bring COVID-19 with them. That's the challenge. It doesn't necessarily affect the borders as much. But I know that the provincial government now is looking seriously at trying to find a way of allowing more remote areas to open. We take Niagara, for instance, and we were to open wide up for this weekend. We will have a large segment of the population coming in from the Greater Toronto area, which, 3 or 4, 5 million people potentially. They're not all going to come, obviously, but they could flood into the area and bring COVID-19 with them. And we have, a little over 700 cases here. We could double that if certain circumstances arose. So this is where the province is, I think, reluctant to say that they will open up regionally if there is easy access to the place that can be opened up. Now, in the remote areas of Northern Ontario or some rural areas, probably that makes some degree of sense. But as Mayor Redekop would appreciate, and the mayors along particularly along Lake Erie, if tomorrow the border were open, for instance, and everyone wanted to come in from Erie County, which has a very high rate of COVID-19, the mayor would probably be quite perturbed by the potential for a spread in the area. So this is the challenge with doing it on a regional basis, although certainly it is the case that in more remote areas, they do not have the problem. But it just takes a few people to enter those areas. They don't have the hospitals and other care centers, if they're more remote, that others do. That was one of the concerns early on when they were talking in Ontario about people going to their cottages from the Greater Toronto area into, we'll call it Northern Ontario, but it's closer to Toronto. And there was a great fear that, first of all, they would bring COVID-19 with them, and second, that the local folks would not be able to handle any significant outbreak. So that's the challenges. But I think that certainly I can say our provincial government appears to be looking very carefully at some kind of regional openings. How that would impact the border would be something different, no doubt.
Thank you, Chair Bradley. One of the questions just popped up here, and it's, again, an anecdotal example, but I think an interesting one. I'll read it. We're a Burlington, Ontario manufacturer with a manufacturing facility in Lancaster, New York. We're an essential business in New York State, interesting, and essential workplace in Ontario. Our senior personnel in Canada all hold US E1 visas. We have not crossed the border since March and need to do so to support our Lancaster team and manage business activities that support manufacturing in both locations. What steps do we need to take to cross the US and to return to Canada without quarantine? Kind of an interesting one. Anybody have any thoughts on that one?
Well, Vern, all I'm going to say is I know I said this earlier. Okay, good. I'm glad Corey's going to. The silence was deafening. But I just want to say from our perspective, again, we're pothole politicians, if you will, and this isn't part of our bailiwick of what we oversee. Yes, we have a loud voice when we lobby together. And I know Mayor Redekop made reference to this cross-border group, and it was great. And Mayor Byron Brown was a part of it as well, Mayor of Lewiston. Sergio Fornicera was the gentleman who used to put these together, and they were terrific, and they were all about relationship building. And then we would discuss lobbying, whether it was going to Washington or to Ottawa or both, and picking an issue, because when we come together, we carry a big stick and people will listen. So I think if anything, and I know just recently the chair sent out a letter to the province from all the 12 mayors of Niagara about some of our openings here. And whenever we do anything collectively, you get a lot more attention and you get a lot more action than individual mayors or individual congressmen or senators or MPs or MPPs. So I think that is really key. It's just a matter of someone taking the lead on this. I nominate Mayor Redekop, and then that's all I got to say. I'll pass this over to Corey.
Love it. Thank you very much, and well said. And Mayor Redekop, thank you for accepting that. Work visas renewals in the US, apparently that's been stalled, and someone's asking whether they know of any potential dates or when that could be renewed.
Not aware of what's happening there. Again, this is not our area of expertise.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, I don't have any information in those regards.
Yeah. Interesting. No, that makes sense. Yeah. I think a lot of the frustration, perhaps in what we've read in the questions, revolve around information. People read the news, they listen to it, and I think our respective governments have done a great job putting together information pieces on the web that people can access. But it looks like there's still a frustration of knowing what the real rules are and who can I go to. Our local representatives, you guys certainly included, have all done a great job, opening your doors to people that have problems, regardless of whether it's your jurisdiction or not. Do we feel that's been adequately done, or is there something that people can turn to? And again, most of the questions related to personal hardship ones, and none of those people, I think, really had a good answer as to where to go. They probably weren't happy with the answers, but nonetheless, well, what are your thoughts on information dissemination, where that's been good or bad?
So Vern, if I might say, I think there's a lot of information out there. I think the federal governments, the state and province, the local governments, the regional and county governments, they've all got very active websites, social media, and so there's a lot of information that's out there. And I get a lot of inquiries, and I'm sure all of you do, on matters that if people had gone to the website or had checked Facebook, they'd have an answer. But so part of the challenge is to get people to go to the sites where they can get that information. But there has been, and as time goes on, it seems to be more and more the case, there has been some muddying of the message, I would say, so that even although in my view, the provincial government has done an excellent job in managing this emergency. As time has gone on, some of their positions have been less and less clear, and the interpretations of things that they're ordering or directing have been less and less clear. And so that's a problem not only for political leaders, but it's a big problem for individuals and businesses that are trying to find out what the rules are and are trying to adhere to the rules. So I would think that the challenge is to make sure that there's clarity in what we do. The Niagara region, as Chair Bradley has said, there are 12 municipalities. Those 12 municipalities in the region have pretty much been aligned in virtually everything of any significance. There have been some variations from community to community because of the specific differences among the municipalities. Niagara Falls and Niagara-on-the-Lake would have large tourism industries, and so some of the policies that they would want to pursue would be somewhat different than other parts of Niagara. But by and large, we've maintained alignment, and that's very helpful for people and businesses who need to know what the rules are. So I think that we just need to make sure that there's clarity and that people have an understanding of where they can go. And I'm sure that we'll all continue to respond on a case-by-case basis. As an example, in Fort Erie, our customer service representatives typically get about 150 phone calls or emails per day to respond to. Over the last couple of weeks, it's been 250. And as the province reopens, those numbers keep going up because there's less and less clarity on what's actually happening and what the rules are. And the classic example, and I'll let this go, although I did want to say that I noticed one of the questions had to do about Canadians wanting to visit family in the U.S. Yes, this is a binational issue. And so there are many Canadians who have relatives in the States. I'm in that category. But I wanted to say that the tweet yesterday by the Minister of whatever, Minister Fedeli, that short-term rentals and cottage rentals would be permitted as of 12:01 today. In the absence of any type of official government statement, in the absence of the regulations that will relate to that, that just creates a lot of confusion among the population, and it creates a lot of difficulty for the municipalities who are trying to enforce the emergency orders from the government. So that type of thing should be avoided so that there is clarity. And I'm sympathetic to people who may not understand what the rules are, but go first to the website of the municipality in which you live, and or go to Facebook or the social media. That typically will have the answers.
Great, thank you very much. Personally, I'm impacted by the difference of reading an article or looking at it online versus listening to our political leaders, say it in person. And so I think this type of format's extremely useful. And I think everybody listening, we had close to 100 people that really get a lot out of it. This is recorded, so in our respective chambers of commerce, we'll have a link to that very shortly. I'm sure Corey can set it up, and I know Dolores is. So anybody that wants to look at it or pass it on to others to listen to, please do so. And again, I think we're very fortunate to have 5 great political leaders who have taken their time today to speak with us. And we're very grateful, and thank you all for the overtime you're putting in week after week after week after week over this issue. So and it's making our population thankful and confident in going through these rough waters, and thanks to great leaders like you guys. So thanks again. Also, Corey, Dolores Fabiano, thank you for putting this together with your respective chambers. A useful exercise and well appreciated. So thanks a lot, everybody.
Yeah, thank you all. I very much appreciate this opportunity. It's good to see all of you. Look forward to seeing you in person.
Yeah, there you go. So
Thank you again.
Yeah,
Thank
so,
you.
so thanks for putting everything together, and very useful. Thank you all.
Air hug.
We'll conclude with that.